Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so when you picture the CEO of a multi-trillion-dollar tech empire, a company that is literally powering the modern AI revolution, you probably imagine this visionary leader, right? Someone driven by relentless optimism and just boundless ambition. But NVIDIA's co-founder and CEO, Jensen Huang, he operates on a completely different frequency. Today, we're going to unpack his bizarrely pessimistic, entirely counterintuitive worldview. It's a philosophy where panic is actually preferred over comfort, and where the secret to dominating the future isn't about having sky-high expectations, but rather expecting absolute disaster. I mean, just listen to this quote. "I wish upon you ample doses of pain and suffering." He actually said this to a room full of elite graduates during an address at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. It's kind of a shocking thing to say to a bunch of high achievers, isn't it? But it perfectly captures his core belief. Huang firmly believes that greatness isn't just born from privilege or natural smarts, it's forged in adversity. To him, suffering is a literal competitive advantage.
All right, let's get into part 1, 30 days from failure. The constant anxiety driving a tech giant.
So how does this philosophy of adversity actually look on the ground in NVIDIA?
Well, despite leading a company valued in the trillions, Huang wakes up every single day with a visceral fear that NVIDIA is just 30 days away from going out of business. 30 days. And this isn't just some quirky motivational slogan. It is the absolute heartbeat of their corporate culture. This perpetual state of alarm, this existential dread, it keeps the whole company hyper-focused. It totally kills any chance of complacency and drives this relentless, urgent need to innovate.
And honestly, he's got a good reason to feel that way. Let's rewind to the mid-90s. NVIDIA's very first product, the NV1 chip, was a catastrophic failure. They bet on the wrong graphic technology, and they were essentially out of cash. Done. Huang had to fly to Japan to meet with the CEO of Sega, who was their main partner at the time. In a moment of just radical transparency, Huang honestly recommended that Sega cancel their contract because NVIDIA's chip was deeply flawed. But he begged them to convert their final $5 million payment into an investment anyway. And you know what? Because of that incredible integrity, Sega's CEO agreed. That $5 million lifeline literally saved NVIDIA from bankruptcy and gave them the breathing room to pivot. Moving right along to Section 2, the gift of low expectations and building resilience from day one. You know, surviving a near-death business experience like that Sega deal takes a very specific psychological makeup. Huang argues a simple but profound equation. People with very high expectations inherently have very low resilience. Think about it. If you're used to constant success, the first major roadblock you hit can completely shatter your ego. Huang attributes his own extreme resilience to his tough upbringing. As an immigrant from Thailand, he was sent to a boarding school in Kentucky where he actually shared dorms with kids recovering from knife fights. Yeah, you heard that right, knife fights. He worked as a dishwasher, scrubbed toilets, and really learned how to keep his expectations incredibly low. So, what's his advice if you're starting a company today? He says, when you start a company, assume it's going to be 1,000,000 times harder than you think. By anticipating the absolute worst-case scenario, every setback is just part of the plan, and every tiny win feels absolutely monumental. You don't crumble when disaster strikes because, well, you already factored disaster into your baseline. That brings us to Section 3, fast failures and intellectual honesty. Essentially, the art of pivoting without ego. Because when you assume things will be 1,000,000 times harder, you've got to be really good at handling the stakes. At NVIDIA, they practice what they call intellectual honesty. It's the willingness to look at a project, even when you love, and ask, is this still the right path? And if the answer is no, you pivot immediately. No ego. There's no clinging to a bad idea just because a big-shot executive championed it. At NVIDIA, changing your mind isn't a sign of weakness. It's seen as a leadership superpower. Making mistakes isn't the problem. Holding on to them is. And this mindset builds a remarkably resilient timeline. NVIDIA is no stranger to taking massive hits. We already talked about the NV1 flop in '95, then there's the dot-com crash. In 2015, they had a massive misstep in the mobile phone chip market against Qualcomm that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Then came the crypto crash in 2018 that left them flooded with unsold inventory. The point is, NVIDIA fails often, but they use intellectual honesty to fail fast. They absorb the shock, redirect their resources, like when they pivoted away from mobile entirely, and they just come back stronger. Sometimes failing fast means you have to completely reinvent how you work. After that NV1 flop, they only had a few months of cash left. They simply couldn't afford the traditional, slow, trial-and-error physical testing for their next chip, the Riva 128. So they did something crazy. They bought a virtual emulator.
They emulated a perfect chip virtually, wrote all the software for it, while waiting agonizing hours for a single frame to load on screen, taped out just one physical chip, and, assuming it was perfect, bypassed any further testing and went straight to production. It was a massive gamble, but it worked, and it permanently sped up their entire innovation cycle. All right, let's look at Section 4, the Neural Network Organization. This is all about abolishing the corporate pyramid. To execute at that kind of breakneck speed, Huang knew the company absolutely could not be structured like a traditional corporation. Instead of your standard military-style hierarchy, the one where middle managers hoard information to maintain their power, Huang built NVIDIA's structure to resemble a computing stack, or a neural network. It is fiercely flat and deeply, deeply transparent. So in real life, what does that actually mean? Well, for starters, Huang has anywhere from 40 to over 60 direct reports. Let that sink in. They operate on this core philosophy that the mission is the boss. They assemble the best teams for a specific goal, completely regardless of job titles. Information isn't slowly filtered down a chain of command. In strategy meetings, new college graduates hear the exact same decisions at the exact same time as the top executive staff. You earn your place based on your ability to reason and help others, not by hoarding privileged information. And finally, Section 5, $0 to billion-dollar markets, investing in the non-existent. Because of this flat structure and their crazy tolerance for failure, NVIDIA is uniquely positioned to do something incredibly difficult: invent the future through what they call a $0 billion market. This is a market that simply does not exist yet. It has $0 in it. Huang's strategy is to anticipate where a massive need will eventually arise and position NVIDIA right there, years or even decades in advance. As he likes to put it, you want to position yourself near the tree so that when the apple finally falls, you're right there to make a diving catch. Let's trace this back. In the 90s, they went all in on 3D PC gaming when serious tech investors literally thought it was a joke. In the 2000s, they poured massive resources into CUDA, a platform for parallel computing that seemed commercially worthless at the time. But guess what? It laid the exact foundation for the AI revolution. Today, they're doing it all over again with the Omniverse and digital twins. They will spend a decade alone in a $0 billion market just building the ecosystem so that when the market finally explodes, they have an absolutely impenetrable moat. And the payoff for that incredibly patient, contrarian strategy? Over a single decade, NVIDIA's GPUs improved computing performance by 100,000 times. That massive leap in parallel processing power is literally the only reason modern artificial intelligence, deep learning, and large language models are feasible today. They built the infrastructure for a revolution way before anyone else even realized a revolution was happening. Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how Jensen Huang weaponizes fear, embraces pain, flattens hierarchies, and places massive bets on $0 billion markets. But it all starts with managing that baseline psychology. So I have to ask you, are your high expectations actually keeping you from success? Are you so afraid of failure, pain, and suffering that you're avoiding the very crucible that builds greatness? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking around those corners.